Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Garrett Schmidt. I am the managing editor for VBC Exhibit Hall, and I'd like to welcome you all to part two of today's three-part session hosted by Roji Health Intelligence. And the series is called Three Keys to Transitioning to an APM. And today's session, which is part two, is called Determining Your Risk Level. Now, if you haven't heard part one, that's okay. It's recorded. You can go back and listen to it. You won't be lost. But we're glad that you're here. And a couple items of note before we get started. Everyone's come on today in listen-only mode, so it's a traditional webinar format in that sense. So you don't have to worry about muting your microphone or your camera or anything like that. And we are recording the session. So what's going to happen is afterwards, when we're done, I'm going to be sending everybody a link to the recording, as well as where you can download the slides. So that way you can follow back along as you're watching the recording or send those along to someone else. And that link will actually go to a place in our library at bbcexhibithall.com where it's going to be housed. And so you'll be able to actually go and see that recording as often as you want or share it with colleagues and friends. And we hope that you do. Finally, today, we want to hear from you during the session. So at any time, if you have a question for our speaker, please ask it. You don't have to wait until the Q&A. We will have a Q&A time towards the end, but you don't need to worry about waiting until then. Just go ahead and ask a question as soon as it comes to you. And we're going to get to as many of those as we possibly can during the time allotted today. We do have a lot of people joining and attending today, so please submit your questions soon, and we'll get to as many as we can. If we don't get to yours, what's going to happen is someone will respond to you via email and get your answer to you in that way. So even if we're just wrapping up with, and we're saying our goodbyes, if you have a question, go ahead and submit it, and we'll get to you. Finally, wanted to introduce our speaker, Miss Terry Hush, and she is the CEO and co-founder of Roji Health Intelligence. She is an author. She does so much. She's been in just about every nook and cranny of healthcare, except for pharmaceuticals, she told me to specify, but I would bet she knows a lot about that too. So I'm excited to hear from Terry today. So welcome, Terry.
Thanks so much, Garrett, and hello, everyone. I'm excited to be able to present part two of the keys to transitioning to APMs, which is about risk. So I know there's a lot of interest in how fast, how high to go in risk, and I'll try to answer all your questions today. Who this presentation is for are health systems and medical organizations that are considering APMs, which are moving into a risk model. So we'll talk a little bit about how fast they're moving, what kinds of risk that you'll see, and we will even talk about ACOs who are on the path right now to a population-based payment model. In part two, we'll cover the types of APMs and the degree of risk in each of those. We'll identify the organizations leveraging maximum APM risk by looking at a current experiment with ACO REACH. We'll hone in on your risk level and how to get there, what tools you need for risk, and how to ensure that your clinicians are on the same APM path that you are. A little bit about us. What we do is help organizations transition to APMs and provide all the services to make your APM successful. We have a large platform that has been in operation for almost 21 years right now and has been expanded continually over the years. We're one of the first data aggregators of clinical information from EMRs, and we are a qualified registry for CMS reporting as well under MIPS. So we provide our clients with the ability to engage physicians and work at a very detailed level with analytics, interventions, all the tools that will help you manage risk. So if you've attended part one, there might be a few things in here that I'm going to go over again because there are some central concepts to what I already covered and what we'll cover today. So the first thing is, what is an APM? Because there's a lot of different nomenclature out there. An APM is not an organization. It is actually a reimbursement model of alternative payment type. And specifically, APMs are focused on moving away from fee-for-service. Most payers and policymakers are on the bandwagon of believing that changing payment models is essential for achieving value. And the data actually supports that a lot. But I'm not going to go into the reasons why. You can ask me about that and I can respond. There's an underlying effect of APMs, and that is to fix the fees. So you got it, the providers who are worried about APMs restricting revenues, well, clearly that's the effect of APMs, is to fix the revenues, to focus on one kind of program, but to make sure that the incentives for the organizations that are adopting population-based payments is to conserve costs. One thing I didn't say last time, and I'm going to say it this time, APMs are almost certainly moving towards a mandatory adoption in the future. So it will cover everything. So my feeling is this dog is not going to get that Frisbee. And the question is, are APMs really essential for changing behavior? Because you might not get there. But thinking that an APM is going to change the behavior is magical thinking. An APM itself is not going to create the incentives that you want towards value. What does create the incentives toward value is if physician reimbursement itself, physician compensation, the way we reward medical staff, the way we reward organizational staff, is also part of driving value. Changed incentives can work also if you have the data and infrastructure, the performance goals, the practice support, the intervention support to actually accomplish the mission. The alignment of incentives from external reimbursement and internal reimbursements is what key to overcoming magical thinking about APMs. But in truth, we know that they have grown very slowly. There's very little change in the proportion of straight fee-for-service. There's very little adoption of population-based payments, which is the ultimate risk under APMs. And even the ACOs have accepted a very small amount of risk. ACOs are hesitant to proceed along the path to financial accountability. And there is continued pushback, even now, against the changes that would alter finances. So it's a hard task, what we see ahead. And what I want to do first is define what those categories of risk are where programs are sitting right now. The first category, and this is coming from actually the Healthcare Payment and Learning Action Network, which was then massaged by Penn LDI. The first category is fee-for-service with no link to quality or value, and that really goes for just straight physician professional fees. Secondly, are fee-for-service with a link. So these are your traditional private health plan improvement programs and pay for performance under MIPS, where there's some small incentive or penalty related to fee-for-service, which can bring your payments up or down. But they don't ultimately end up being a different kind of payment model. There are still a lot of incentives towards volume in fee-for-service, and those aren't mitigated at all by most of those incentives. Category 3 is an alternative payment model that is built on fee-for-service. So this is your traditional MSSP ACOs. And there are also some of the episodic structures like BCPI or BPCI. I did say that correctly. I'm always interspersing those. BPCI for Medicare. Category 4 are what the current focus is on for ACO REACH, prospective payment that are population-based payment modules. You can also include in category 4 episodic payment models for specialty care models, oncology, nephrology, and so on. This is more information from the Healthcare Payment Learning and Action Network. And what you see are those categories broken out into where they're actually occurring, and then a nice pie chart. So I didn't think it was a good idea to redo this. I think this is a beautiful slide. You can see that about 40% of the total pie is still in fee-for-service, and about 22% is in pay-for-performance. So those two together are very staunchly within the fee-for-service model, and they still amount for the majority of all payments going to providers. Then we've got the APMs on a fee-for-service architecture, the MSSP model, and we see about 21% for that. And of those MSSPs that have gone down the risk level into a downside risk, we see about 10%. Then there's the other population-based payment models. Those are, as we know, some condition-based episodes, some statement payments to integrated delivery systems that are on special contracts with private health plans, some comprehensive population-based payment, very, very small. And this one seems very interesting to me. I took this information, stacked it up over time so that you can see where each of these trade-offs have actually been made by providers. So fee-for-service, relatively stable. It starts to dip down with the pandemic. So you see not a whole lot of movement here over the last 5 years. But the other two, pay-for-performance and APMs, are on a trade-off here. And what you see is that pay-for-performance is declining over time, but those organizations that adopted pay-for-performance are beginning to move into APM arrangements. So clearly the pay-for-performance has created some confidence factor for providers who are going into this next stage. So let's look a little deeper on which segment of the provider population is more willing to go into population-based payments. So I took a look at the ACO REACH approved list. And if you've been reading the press, you know that some initial organizations were approved and then some have dropped out since approval, and we don't know whether that will continue to go down. But of those who have been approved and have chosen global payments, because you know there's a professional payment option only, many of them have been corporate and equity-backed ACO enabler organizations or platform-based companies. So basically this is corporate medicine and not individual traditional providers. It isn't the majority, but there are quite a few of these organizations on the list, and the weight of them on the list is the coverage over all the different states that they offer these services. So in the aggregate, it may be quite a bit. We don't have a lot of detail from CMS on what that is. There are several physician-led ACOs and community ACOs that have been experienced, are successful, and delivering savings right now. So that's interesting. I was surprised a bit to see the physician-led ACOs moving towards a global payment, but they have done so, which I think bodes well over time for the gumption of the current ACOs to move in that direction. And there are a few, but not a lot. In fact, this is another surprise to me. There are not a lot of large health systems who've invested so much time in consolidation, so much energy in data and systems, but there are not a lot who applied and went for ACO REACH. So I think it's time to examine who these corporate competitors are and why they are so prominent in models like this, because it was open to everyone and traditional providers could have applied, but and it's not clear who was denied because CMS has not released that information. But corporate healthcare has really changed the workforce of physicians that we're looking at right now. In the last year, we've seen a massive migration to employment, but that migration to employment has been not going to the traditional providers, it's been going to corporate medicine practices. And their business models have been built for the purpose of doing APMs with population-based payment, and also many towards concierge medicine. So simple, similar kind of metric going on there. Most significantly, they can afford to make the mistakes because they've got a lot of money behind the organizations. So what this should tell us, though, is that with the right tools, profitability is possible under population-based payments because the business organizations are going there. And physicians, this is the other thing we should be taking away, physicians are clearly attracted to the model because they're moving there and they're moving away from traditional providers. Let's look a little bit more under the hood of the corporate medicine practice. The MSO enablers are purchasing practices away from health systems and ACOs. So the market is shrinking competitively for ACOs and traditional providers who have those practices. Private equity is also financing practice acquisition and in specialties and employing new physicians in primary care-based kind of models that are ACOs. Those companies are rooted in analytics, population health platforms, are growing rapidly, and are growing physician employment. And some specialties at this point are becoming predominantly equity-backed. As I mentioned, the largest single year of migration to employment was 2021. 74% of physicians are now employed, and the majority are employed by corporate healthcare. The key is that corporate medicine is who is buying into population-based payments. So how do you start your journey to risk if you're a traditional provider? And what we have seen is not that we've got a lot to do and very complex task. It's incredibly simple, but whether you're willing to do it is a completely different matter. Love Peter Drucker's quotes. So here's the dilemma. The spaceship corporate medical, nimble, move fast, does one kind of thing, which is provide services, has lots of money, perceives risk as an opportunity, and is data-driven. Traditional providers move slow, heavy equipment, lots of facilities, lots of groups, research, residency programs, lots of things that they're doing, maybe educating. Money can be hard. Perceive risk as a problem. And then it's a politics and culture-driven type of organization. It's one of the places I have lived in healthcare, and I remember the politics is, since I've also lived in government healthcare, it's more brutal than government. So what you see the difference here, but I think there's one key in this list, and that is the perceiving risk is the opportunity versus risk is the problem. Which leads us to what is safe? Here are the questions that providers are asking. Do you have experience? Can you do it? What are you doing now to examine your costs? Isn't that hard? Are you tracking outcomes beyond quality measures? Do you have an active clinical team evaluating your costs, improvement? Are they engaged? Do you share cost and outcome variation data with physicians? Are you using clinical data and claims? These are all serious and valid questions, and organizations need to be asking all of these things as they bring up their programs. The problem is that you can also look at these questions as a barrier to achieving the next end. What should be asking is, how do you create the opportunity to grow physicians and patients? Because if you are facing the kind of competition I described a little earlier, your only option under the current model, if we are moving to APMs as an overall health system, is to shrink. And so we need to perceive that value-based care is an opportunity. How do we tackle that opportunity? The question providers should be asking is, how do we get the experience in risk-based payment models? And if we don't have it, where do we get the data and technology that will help us get to value? And how can we energize our physicians around value? What do they need? A lot of organizations are holding out for the Holy Grail, which is the truth about how much you're spending now and whether population-based payment will cover your spending. You can't model your way out of this. Why? Because you won't know what your costs are until you're already getting claims data. The only people who know what their costs are those who are getting claims data, like ACOs who are already in the program and haven't proceeded along the path to risk. Those are the only ones in the sweet spot of understanding what it will take to get there, if they're using their claims data to get there. It doesn't mean that they'll know their drivers or what makes up those costs. They'll know the costs in the huge categories, and they'll know the total number. Your biggest financial opportunity will be under population-based payments. But if you're holding out for the understanding of what that will actually do to your spending right now, you can't actually even get there. So let's look at your options. You can start small. You can start with a private payer, smaller population. You can start a Medicare ACO with lower risk now. You don't even have to move to risk for a long time under the proposed rules if they're adopted. And you can use that time to practice and align your internal incentives for your organization with the knowledge that eventually that bandwidth for development will end and you will be forced to move into an APM with downside risk. You can start with professional payments only. You can build your network with a smaller group of physicians and make sure that it's only primaries in it. And why is that important? Because attribution of costs related to your specialties is triggered by the inclusion of them in your organization and the fact that a patient may only see a specialty during the year. And so you become the candidate for all of the costs related to that patient. And you can work, if you're so inclined, if you're in a multi-specialty group or a select specialty group, you can work on specialty episode models. You can start big. You can start a Medicare ACO at the lowest risk, but proceed aggressively to the next level and plan accordingly. You can start an ACO agreement with private health plan at professional fees, moving to population-based payment in the same way. You can joint venture with an ACO, moving to population-based payments aggressively. So your options are to go either way. And if you believe that you can never make it to population-based program, you need to understand the contracts will always have safeguards in these programs. You will not be hung out to completely dry. There will be stop loss on particular cases. You will negotiate what those are with private agreements. You will negotiate that you can get claims data in private. You will be able to, over time, not now, you will be able to choose your specialists. You will certainly be able to encourage your members to go to specialists, which is a big deal. It covers 40 to 60% of medical costs. So you want to know where your patients are going, and you need to be able to do that. The big thing to remember, and especially for private negotiations, private health plan, is that data is your key to evidence-based success. So if you don't have the data, you will need to ensure that you have regular digitized claim data before you proceed to negotiate a risk contract with an entity that is not planning to give you claims. You really can't beat your way out of that paper bag. The essentials you need to go forward and accept population-based payments. First of all, you need the data and infrastructure to be able to build it. That is not necessarily something you have to do internally. In fact, if you want to move warp speed, you should not do this internally. It takes years and resources and an understanding of what the data is in the back end of systems, which is very hard to do. It also needs to become completed with an understanding of what the market is. And the problem with the traditional provider is that since you haven't been working on risk, it will take a long time to learn what that really means and to practice what that involves. So we recommend to most of our clients that they develop the infrastructure by purchasing some elements of it and make it plug and play with their own systems. You'll need physician buy-in and leadership. Again, this is something, you can't purchase this out there. You need to cultivate it within your culture. You need a culture of change in order to make that happen. That's the top of the pyramid for a reason. If you don't believe that you can get there, you will not have the charisma that it takes to build your physician leadership, to build the buy-in and collaboration, and make sure that everybody is aligned to go forward. Physicians are clearly less risk averse than health systems. They're showing it by going with employment to ACO enablers and selling their practices to entities who are going into population-based risk. All the data is showing that physicians have a higher degree of risk potential than larger systems do right now. But many organizations don't bring physicians into the organizational venture. And having looked at the structure of many ACOs, we see that ACOs really aren't participating in the actual joint venture. And I have to believe that most organizations think that they're helping physicians by doing that, or they're reading the signals from their physicians who are worried about risk. But the reality is that physicians need to feel part of the enterprise. If they are on the sidelines, they will always be on the sidelines. They will not be part of your team. And it's hard to separate out a team between the organization or a facility or a group of facilities and the workforce that's making it happen for you. But we'll discuss a lot about the clinical network in part 3, so I won't go into more of that now. I want to leave time for questions. To make risk work for you, population-based and episodic payments give you the greatest opportunity to build your enterprise and align your incentives if there are reasonable constraints. Those constraints, as I mentioned, they're built on making sure that you can have the claims data so that you can see your total cost comprehensively. You need to have the underlying EMR and data structure. You should go back to part 1 slides and look at all of the elements of a value-based care technology that you should be assessing your systems on. You need to be able to match the benefits of competitors in the market, or they will still be in a position to steal your physicians and your patients. There aren't any shortcuts on the requirements to going to APMs if you want to be successful. So you will have to ramp up. And if you're going at it from an aggressive stance, you need to consider ramping up quickly and creating that infrastructure through a purchase arrangement rather than a build arrangement, and to get the leadership with you on that plan. So I'm available for questions. Do we want to go through these now?
Okay. Yes. Very good, Terry. This is a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot here, actually. We do have a number of questions coming in. If you do have a question for Terry, please go ahead and ask it now in the little questions module there, and we'll get to as many as we can. In no particular order here, we're going to hop in. First question is, what's the future of the RVS when we all go to 100% population-based payments? Will there be any, quote, cap on how much docs can get paid, like, for instance, FMVs?
I don't know. I think that what we've seen over the past 5 years is constantly changing payment models. And it seems to me that a lot of the population-based payments are moving in the direction of trying to make it very flexible internally for APM entities that are adopting APMs, to be able to have the tools to change reimbursement on their own. Medicare came out recently, or CMS came out recently, and said that they're rethinking the idea that ACOs shouldn't be able to negotiate or steer people to specialists and change the reimbursement. And that's a really big thing. I mean, that means what they're really moving toward is kind of a global risk arrangement. And under those kinds of risk arrangements, separate kind of capitation fee schedule arrangements are going to be mitigated. Now, we've also seen a lot of evidence that all the different reimbursement structures under fee-for-service will probably start to be more constrained, and that there will be disincentives by not adopting changes that are needed in the fee-for-service structure in order to make them more unattractive. And in fact, that's one of the recommendations that's come out from some of the policymakers who have been publishing papers on APMs recently. Don't change fee-for-service, don't make it any more attractive. Start implementing constraints.
Great. Yeah. Sorry to kind of throw you a curveball with that one. And please let me know if any of these are repetitive, because I'm just kind of asking them as they come in. So if you've already touched on the topic, my apologies. Next question is, you mentioned we won't know what our costs are before going under contract. Can you explain more?
If you are depending only on your own systems to estimate your costs, what the payer is doing for you, whether that is CMS or whether the private health plan, your total costs are your total patient cost, no matter where your patients are going. That data is only available from claims. So your patients may be seeing people out of network. ACOs are already very familiar with this. And those are part of their patient costs. You are at risk for the total patient costs, not for just what they're spending for you. So unless you can see where your patients are going everywhere, you won't even know what you need to tackle in cost control and what specialists you need to bring under your tent to collaborate on specialty care costs, and how to evaluate what kind of clinical issues you have in your population. So it's a complete gamush without claims data. That's what you won't know. The ACOs get that, but they get data late, too late to actually be of real value to them. They can see it in hindsight, quarter by quarter claims data, and eventually that time frame needs to be moved up for everybody, and you need to have claims data from all payers.
Very good. Next question here is, you make a case for population-based payments, but that's like jumping off a cliff. Why shouldn't we start with professional payments?
Because it's very difficult to align the incentives for value with just professional payments. If 40 to 60% of your costs are specialty fees, and most, by the way, most primary care payments are, are focused on the primary care physicians and not on the specialists. So if the primaries cannot control the specialty costs, can't collaborate, and everybody's under a different kind of incentive, then you really don't have the money through professional fees to be able to do anything except tread water. So your primaries may be a better and more in tune group of providers to help you, but it's short term until you can get the revenue that will embed the savings you have through population-based payments. The idea is that population-based payments are going to be a revenue build, not a revenue drain.
Interesting. Yeah, okay. Next question is, what are the FTC's antitrust guidelines, vertical and horizontal, for corporate expansion of APMs?
Well, so far the FTC has not been going after their it's a good question. I can't answer that question.
That is an interesting one. Okay, we'll move along to the next
so
one.
far, everything's been shot down in terms of any acquisitions and groups. We're not seeing a lot of ability to control what's going on in the environment.
Yeah. Okay, next question here is, have you seen a difference between younger and older physicians in their movement towards risk?
I haven't looked at the data in detail on that. I have looked at survey information, and I think it's pretty clear that the younger physicians are much more interested in employment. They're interested in life quality, and they don't have a problem with risk. If you start with an incentive structure that rewards you for risk, then you're going to be happy with risk. Now, part of the issue with the older physicians is that they're not the ones that are moving to employment. They're still in private practices that have been embedded in fee-for-service. And so they're used to making money. They're used to making, calling their shots. And there's even the physician-led ACOs as a group have a different personality on how they go about saving money. It's just a different way. I've been very successful.
Okay. Interesting. All right, next question here is, could you please address the value of population health management versus process improvement and efficiency development in physician practice operations?
Can I address the value of population health management in physician operations?
Yeah,
Okay,
let me read it. Let me read the question again for you. Could you address the value of population health management versus process improvement and efficiency development in physician practice operations?
I think both are needed. But I think the thing that I would say right now is that what's driving medical costs is a third thing that also needs to be considered. Population health management is great and necessary. So is practice transformation. One of the things that we're missing, though, is clinically focused interventions. We have substituted kind of an administrative transformation process in healthcare in a lot of the ACOs. And I think that what we're doing is missing the thing that's really driving costs, which is what's happening clinically. And what's happening clinically is that we've got a population that is getting worse and worse, and we have not addressed the outcomes coming from that population. Once you start developing episodes of care as your tool of looking at costs, you start to see that what's driving it is worsening outcomes, movement into events like hospitalization, ER, hypoglycemia, all sorts of clinical events, and progression of disease. And we don't have the tools to do that. So population health is great, but it needs to be deployed also in keeping with clinical interventions. Population health needs to be a vetting process for clinical interventions, more patient navigation, more patient care coordination, also at the clinical level. And at the end of that process, the value-based care technology needs to enhance this practice transformation into a clinically integrated kind of care team, interdisciplinary, behavioral health, along with primary care. So lots to do here. I don't think that I have a hierarchy of what's important. I just think we ought to be focusing on the entire problem of what's driving costs.
Sure. Okay, great. We do have a few more questions. So again, if you do have one, now's the time. Please go ahead and submit your question. We'll get to as many of them as we can. The next question that comes in is the problem that specialty practices are at essence procedure based and they need to partner with the pre and post care providers?
Is the problem? Well, first of all, I don't see that there is a problem with specialty proceduralists. I think that the issue when you look at procedures is that you've got huge cost variation in procedures, and you've also got some variations in the outcomes of those procedures that need to be identified and clinically reviewed. For example, when you look at episodes of, let's say, something as simple as colonoscopies, you see patients that probably never should have gone there. They were probably scheduled because it was a quality measure that they have a colonoscopy, and yet you find patients dropping out of episodes with exorbitant hundreds of thousands of dollars in costs because they were the wrong candidate. Proceduralists need to be supported with the data that's coming from the APM entity. The proceduralists are not going to have all that information. This is the problem that I see with the specialty care in general. Once the specialist walks out of a procedure room, a lot of times they don't know what's happening. They see their professional charges. They don't see what's happened in the recovery all the time. They don't see the blood clots that are down the line. And many of them consider that to be handled back at the primary care level. So the only way you can get at those issues with proceduralists and to reduce the variation is to package that data and then collaborate with the proceduralists, not just on the pre and post care, but on what's happened to create the variation in costs.
Okay, yeah, good answer. And we have one final question here. And this question is, didn't the capitation payments to practices during the COVID pandemic motivate more physician practices to move towards risk models?
Yes, yes. The data is showing that those practices that had prospective payments were happy and survived, and those practices that depended on volume did not do well and were hurt. And this is being credited with the change and a lot of physician attitudes towards prospective payments coming down the line.
Wonderful, great. Well, that unfortunately is all the time we have for today's questions. And gosh, this was such an informative session. As we conclude, I wanted to encourage everyone to visit the Roji Health Intelligence virtual exhibit booth at bbcexhibithall.com, and you can at this virtual booth you can interact with their team. You can read more about what they're doing specifically in the value-based care space, learn a little bit more about them, and connect. It's a great resource, and also on our in our library at the bbcexhibithall.com is where the recording of today's session will be archived. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send out an email to everybody later on this afternoon that was registered for today's session, and there will be a link to the recording as well as to the slides for download. So I wanted to thank again you, Terry, for a wonderful session. We hope that you join us for part 3. In that email I send you guys, I'm going to include a link to register for part 3 and hope you join us for that. This has been a wonderful series. If you would like to reach out to the Roji team, you can reach Dan or Terry or anyone will be able to help you there with questions or to continue the dialogue from today. Or feel free to reach out to me as well, and I'm happy to facilitate an introduction. So, but thank you all so much for coming and spending your afternoon with us. Thank you, Terry, for a wonderful presentation. We hope that we see you all for part 3, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weeks. Thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.